Elena Hartwell, a dedicated but exhausted nurse, faces a life-altering decision when an unidentified elderly patient suddenly flatlines in a restricted hospital wing. Despite strict orders from her supervisor to wait for a specialized team, Elena knows the man won't survive the delay. Trusting her instincts over hospital protocol, she breaks the rules and shocks him back to life with a defibrillator. Her act of defiance comes with severe consequences. Elena is immediately suspended and threatened with losing her medical license. But everything changes when the mysterious patient regains consciousness. The John Doe she risked her career to save is revealed to be Victor Langford, a reclusive billionaire who secretly owns half the hospital. Instead of punishing her, Victor is deeply impressed by her courage to put a patient's life above bureaucracy. What began as an act of insubordination soon becomes the moment that transforms Elena's career and the future of the hospital itself. The silence in the hallway felt heavier than the screaming monitors ever did. Elena's hands were still shaking, the adrenaline from the resuscitation slowly turning into a cold, hollow ache in her chest. She looked down at her palms, red from the pressure of the CPR, and then at the elderly man in the bed. His chest was finally rising and falling in a steady, rhythmic pattern. She had saved him. But the victory was short-lived. Step away from the patient, Nurse Hartwell. Now. The voice belonged to Dr. Sterling, the chief of medicine. He didn't look relieved that a life had been spared, he looked livid. His face was a deep shade of purple, and his eyes were narrowed behind his expensive spectacles. Beside him stood two burly security guards, their radios crackling with static that seemed to echo Elena's internal panic. Dr. Sterling, he was coding, Elena whispered, her voice cracking. The specialized team was stuck in the south elevator. If I hadn't shocked him, he would be dead. What you've done is a catastrophe, Sterling hissed, stepping into her personal space. He didn't care about the man in the bed, he cared about the liability. You aren't cleared for the Gold Wing. You aren't authorized to use that equipment without a lead physician present. You have bypassed every safety protocol this hospital has spent decades building. He reached out and snatched the stethoscope from around her neck. The sudden tug jerked Elena forward. Consider yourself terminated, effective immediately, he declared, his voice booming through the quiet suite. And don't think a simple firing is the end of this. I will personally see to it that the board sues you for malpractice. You'll be lucky if you aren't in a courtroom by the end of the month. You didn't save a life, Hartwell, you committed a crime. One of the security guards placed a firm hand on Elena's shoulder. It wasn't a gentle gesture, it was a nudge toward the exit. Elena felt the eyes of the other nurses on her, some filled with pity, others with fear. She had always been the one they turned to when things got tough, but now, she was being treated like a criminal. As she was led toward the elevators, she looked back one last time at the silver-haired man. He remained unconscious, unaware that the woman who just gave him back his future had just lost hers. Keep moving, the guard muttered. Elena walked through the lobby, her head held as high as she could manage, even as her world crumbled. She stepped out into the cool night air, the automatic doors sliding shut behind her. With a final, metallic click. She was no longer a nurse. She was a woman with no job, a mountain of potential legal debt, and nothing left but the memory of a heartbeat she wasn't supposed to save. The walk home was a blur of streetlights and cold wind. Inside her small, quiet apartment, the silence was louder than the hospital ever was. Elena sat at her kitchen table, still wearing her wrinkled scrubs. She stared at her phone, waiting for a call that she knew wouldn't come. There were no more shifts to check, no more patient updates to receive. She had spent years studying, pulling double shifts, and sacrificing sleep to earn her nursing license. Now, in just 5 minutes, Dr. Sterling had wiped it all away. She opened her laptop and searched for the hospital's news, but there was nothing about the John Doe in room 702. It was as if he didn't exist, and she was the only one who remembered his heart starting to beat again under her hands. The next morning, the reality of the situation hit even harder. Elena tried to log into the hospital's employee portal to check her insurance, but her password was already disabled. Access denied flashed in red letters across the screen. It was a digital slap in the face. She reached for her coffee mug, her hand still feeling the ghost of the defibrillator's weight. She felt a deep sense of isolation. She had done the right thing, hadn't she? A man was alive because of her. But as she looked at her bank account balance, she realized that doing the right thing didn't pay the rent. If Sterling followed through on his threat to sue, she wouldn't just be unemployed, she would be bankrupt. Every time her phone buzzed with a generic news alert, her heart jumped, thinking it was a legal notice or a call from the board. She was a ghost in her own life, haunted by the what-ifs. What if she had waited? What if she had just followed the rules? She looked at a photo of her graduation day, her younger self smiling with pride, and felt a tear finally roll down her cheek. The weight of the silence was broken only by a sudden, sharp knock at her door. Elena froze. Was it the court papers already? Or was it something else? The knock at the door was sharp and persistent. When Elena opened it, she didn't find a process server with a lawsuit. Instead, a young man in a dark suit handed her a plain manila envelope. From a friend, he said, before disappearing down the hallway. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as she tore the envelope open. Inside was a single printed page, a medical file that shouldn't exist. At the hospital, the man in room 702 had been labeled a John Doe, a nameless patient with no history. But this document told a different story. The name at the top of the page sent a chill down her spine, Victor Langford. Elena gasped. She didn't follow the stock market, but even she knew that name. Victor Langford was a titan of industry, a man who had built half the city's skyline. As she scrolled through the leaked data, she found a shocking detail buried in the hospital's corporate structure. Langford wasn't just a patient, he was the primary shareholder of the entire healthcare network. He owns the hospital, she whispered to the empty room. He owns the chair Dr. Sterling sits in. Suddenly, the pieces clicked together. Dr. Sterling hadn't been angry because Elena broke a rule. He was terrified. The hospital's specialized VIP team had been late to respond to the very man who paid their salaries. If word got out that the owner nearly died because of corporate red tape and a slow response, Sterling's career would be over. Elena realized that by saving Victor, she hadn't just broken a protocol, she had uncovered a massive cover-up. The hospital board was trying to destroy her reputation to make sure she never had the credibility to tell the truth about what happened in the Gold Wing. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window. She was no longer just a nurse fighting for her job. She was the only witness to a billionaire's brush with death. For the first time since being escorted out, the fear in her gut was replaced by a spark of cold, hard determination. The next morning, the official blow landed. A courier dressed in a crisp, black uniform arrived at Elena's door, but he didn't have a friendly tip this time. He handed her a heavy, cream-colored envelope embossed with the hospital's gold seal. Inside was a formal notice of disciplinary hearing. The language was cold and calculated. It stated that Elena was required to attend a closed-door session with the Board of Governors to address grave violations of medical safety and professional ethics. At the bottom, in bold letters, it warned that the board would be deciding whether to move forward with a permanent revocation of her nursing license and a multi-million-dollar malpractice lawsuit. Elena felt the air leave her lungs. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a sentencing. Dr. Sterling and The board were moving fast, trying to bury her before Victor Langford could fully recover or speak. They wanted her silenced, stripped of her credentials, and branded as a danger to patients, so that no one would believe her if she ever spoke up about the delay in his care. She spent the next few hours pacing her small apartment. Part of her wanted to run, to hide, to move to another state and start over as someone else. But then she looked at the leaked file she had received the day before. She thought about Victor's face, the way his hand had twitched when his heart finally caught the rhythm she gave him. "They think I'm a victim," she whispered, her voice gaining strength. "They think I'm just a nurse they can throw away." She realized that the board meeting was the only place where she could face her accusers. If she didn't show up, she was admitting defeat. If she did show up, she was walking into a lion's den, with nothing but her own word against a room full of powerful men in suits. She reached into her closet and pulled out her best professional outfit. It wasn't as comfortable as her scrubs, but it felt like armor. She wasn't going there to beg for her job back. She was going there to tell the truth, even if it was the last thing she ever did as a medical professional. The glass doors of the hospital's executive floor felt like the entrance to a fortress. Elena took a deep breath, smoothing her jacket and trying to stop her hands from shaking. As she stepped into the boardroom, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The room was vast, dominated by a massive mahogany table. Around it sat 12 people in expensive suits, their faces like stone. At the head of the table sat Dr. Sterling, looking smug and untouchable. He didn't even look up as Elena took the lone wooden chair placed in the center of the room, facing them like a prisoner on trial. "Nurse Hartwell," Sterling began, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "We are here to review the events of Tuesday night. You are accused of unauthorized entry into a restricted zone, the use of medical equipment without supervision, and endangering the life of a high-priority patient." One by one, the board members lobbied accusations at her. They spoke about Protocol 104 and legal liability as if she had committed a robbery instead of saving a life. They showed a grainy security video of her running down the hall with the defibrillator, pausing the frame to highlight her disordered appearance and reckless behavior. "I saved his life," Elena said, her voice firm despite the lump in her throat. "The team was late. If I had followed your protocol, that man would be in the morgue right now." "That is a matter of opinion, not medical fact," a woman at the end of the table countered coldly. "What is a fact is that you are a liability to this institution." Dr. Sterling leaned forward, a predatory smile touching his lips. "The board has reached a preliminary decision. We will be recommending the full revocation of your license and filing a formal suit for damages. Unless, of course, you'd like to sign this confession of gross negligence right now? It might save you some legal fees." He slid a single piece of paper across the long table. It was a trap. If she signed it, she was admitting she was a bad nurse. If she didn't, they would bury her in debt. Elena looked at the paper, then at the circle of powerful people waiting for her to break. The room was silent, the tension thick enough to suffocate. Just as she reached for the pen, not to sign, but to throw it back at them, the heavy double doors at the back of the room swung open with a violent thud. The heavy double doors didn't just open, they slammed against the marble walls with a sound like a gunshot. Every head at the mahogany table snapped toward the back of the room. "Doctor." Sterling's smug smile froze, then slowly slid off his face as if it were melting. A man in a wheelchair was being pushed into the room by a stern-looking private nurse, but he didn't look like a patient anymore. Victor Langford was dressed in a crisp, white hospital gown, topped with an expensive silk robe that cost more than Elena's car. His silver hair was brushed back, and his eyes, once clouded and rolling in his head during the cardiac arrest, were now like two chips of blue flint. Am I interrupting a private party? Victor's voice wasn't weak. It was a low, dangerous growl that commanded the air in the room. Mr. Langford. Dr. Sterling scrambled to his feet, his chair screeching against the floor. Sir. You shouldn't be out of bed. You've had a very traumatic medical event. We were just finishing up a disciplinary matter regarding the staff member responsible for the staff member responsible for the fact that I am currently breathing? Victor interrupted. He signaled for his nurse to stop the wheelchair right next to Elena. He looked at the tiny, wooden chair she had been forced to sit in, then looked at the plush, leather executive chairs the board members occupied. The silence was suffocating. Elena felt her heart racing, but for the first time in days, it wasn't out of fear. It was out of awe. Up close, Victor Langford radiated an aura of absolute power. I've been awake for 4 hours, Victor said, his gaze sweeping across the board members, who were now all standing up out of habit. And in those 4 hours, I've had my private security team pull the internal logs of this hospital. Do you know what I found, Sterling? Sterling opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for water. I found out that your specialized VIP team was busy at a pharmaceutical gala on the other side of the city, Victor continued, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. I found out that my heart stopped for nearly 3 minutes while you were all worrying about Protocol 104. And then, I saw the footage of this young woman. He reached out and placed a firm, steady hand on Elena's trembling shoulder. The touch was warm and grounding. I saw a nurse who didn't care about your rules, your boards, or your threats. I saw the only person in this entire building who remembered that a hospital is supposed to save lives, not just collect insurance checks. Victor turned his gaze back to the head of the table, his eyes narrowing. Now, I believe someone was mentioned as being terminated. I'd like to discuss exactly who that's going to be. Victor Langford's hand remained on Elena's shoulder, a steady anchor in the middle of the storm. He looked around the room at the board members, who were now shuffling their feet and avoiding his gaze. The silence was so thick you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Mr. Langford, please, Dr. Sterling stammered, his face pale. We were only trying to protect the hospital's reputation. There are legal standards, liability issues, we couldn't let a junior nurse take such a risk with a man of your stature. Victor let out a short, dry laugh that sounded like shifting gravel. A man of my stature? You mean the man who signed the checks for those marble floors you're standing on? Or the man who funded the very wing where you almost let me die? He reached into the pocket of his robe and pulled out a small, gold-rimmed pair of glasses. He put them on and looked at the confession Sterling had tried to force Elena to sign. He picked it up, ripped it into slow, deliberate pieces, and let the scraps flutter onto the mahogany table like snow. Let's be very clear, Victor said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I don't just donate to this hospital. Through Langford Holdings, I own 51% of the parent company that manages this entire healthcare network. That means I own this table. I own those chairs. And, technically, Dr. Sterling, I own the very tie you are wearing. The board members gasped. Most of them knew he was a major donor, but only the inner circle knew the true extent of his ownership. Elena felt a dizzying sensation. She had risked her life for a man who literally owned the world she worked in. You spent the last hour trying to destroy this woman's life to cover up your own incompetence. Victor continued, his grip on Elena's shoulder tightening protectively. You called her a liability. You called her a criminal. But the truth is, she is the only person in this room with a shred of integrity. He turned his head slightly to look at Elena. For a moment, the flint in his eyes softened into something like fatherly pride. She didn't see a billionaire. She didn't see a shareholder. She just saw a human being who needed help. Then, his gaze snapped back to the board. The revelation here isn't that I'm alive. The revelation is that this hospital is being run by cowards who are more afraid of a lawsuit than a flatline. And that is about to change. Victor Langford let the silence hang in the air for a long, agonizing minute. He leaned back in his wheelchair, his eyes tracking each board member like a predator watching trapped prey. Doctor. Sterling was trembling so hard that his glasses rattled against his nose. This board was created to ensure this hospital provides the best care in the country, Victor said. His voice cold and steady. Instead, you've turned it into a high-priced club for people who care more about their bonuses than their patients. You sat here and tried to destroy the only person who actually did her job. He looked at the woman sitting next to him, the woman with the messy hair and tired eyes who had literally shocked life back into his body. Dr. Sterling, Victor barked. You're the first. You're not just fired, you're being stripped of your medical directorship immediately. My lawyers will be reviewing every protocol you've signed in the last 5 years. If I find one more instance where a patient's safety was traded for a legal shield, you won't just be unemployed, you'll be in a cell. Sterling's face went from pale to ghostly white. He tried to speak, but only a small, pathetic squeak escaped his throat. He looked at the security guards, the same ones who had escorted Elena out, but they wouldn't look at him. They were now standing at attention for Victor. And as for the rest of you, Victor continued, his gaze sweeping across the 11 other men and women at the table. I expect a formal letter of resignation from every person who voted to fire Nurse Hartwell by the end of the business day. If you don't resign, I will dissolve this entire board and replace you with people who actually know how to use a stethoscope. One by one, the board members began to gather their leather portfolios and scurried toward the exit. They didn't look at Elena. They didn't look at Sterling. They fled like rats leaving a sinking ship. Within seconds, the massive, expensive room was empty, except for Victor, his private nurse, and Elena. The heavy mahogany table that had felt like an altar for her sacrifice now just looked like a piece of furniture. Elena let out a breath she felt she'd been holding since Tuesday night. They're gone, she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of relief and shock. They are, Victor said softly. He turned his wheelchair toward her and took her hand. His grip was surprisingly strong. But a hospital cannot run without a heart, Elena. And I think I know exactly where to find a new one. The boardroom, which had felt like a cold courtroom only minutes ago, was now flooded with the warm glow of the afternoon sun. With the corrupt board members gone, the space felt lighter, as if the building itself were breathing a sigh of relief. Victor Langford looked at Elena, his sharp features softening into a sincere smile. Elena, he said, his voice quiet but resonant. Rules are made by people who are afraid of mistakes. But medicine is about courage. You showed more courage in 30 seconds than Dr. Sterling showed in 30 years. He reached into the pocket of his robe and pulled out a small, silver lapel pin, the symbol of the hospital's highest excellence. He pressed it into her hand. I'm not just giving you your job back, Victor continued. I am appointing you as the new head of patient advocacy and clinical ethics. You will answer directly to me. Your job won't be to follow the handbook, your job will be to rewrite it. I want you to make sure that no nurse ever has to choose between their career and a patient's life again. Elena stared at the pin, then at the man she had saved. Tears pricked her eyes, but they weren't tears of exhaustion or fear. They were tears of triumph. She had started the week as a tired nurse, with messy hair and a rebellious streak, and now she was the most powerful advocate for the patients in the entire city. I don't know what to say, Mr. Langford, she whispered. You don't have to say anything, Victor replied, patting her hand. Just keep doing what you do best. Keep breaking the rules that deserve to be broken. As Elena walked out of the boardroom, she didn't feel like a victim anymore. She felt like a leader. She passed the nurse's station on the way to her old locker, and her colleagues stopped what they were doing to stare in awe. Word had traveled fast. The renegade nurse was now the boss. Elena pinned the silver emblem to her scrubs, adjusted her badge, and headed back toward the ER. There were lives to be saved, and this time, the rules were finally on her side. The story of the nurse who broke the rules didn't end with a firing, it ended with a revolution.